Welcome back to the Healthy Mama podcast. Friends, I have a special guest for you today. I'm very excited to be talking about how to make health and fitness doable and actually maybe enjoyable without burning out. So, if you've been wondering how to build strength or feel better in your body or stay consistent with exercise and nutrition without burning out or needing hours at the gym, then you're going to want to listen to this episode. So, let me introduce to you Kate Boyle. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me on the podcast today, Lucy. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here, and I know that you are in Australia, so that's really cool. And I also know that you've been in this industry for like 20 years. So I was wondering if you could go into a little bit about your journey and how you ended up being involved in what you do now and doing the Pilates.
Sure. So I was originally my teenage years planning on becoming a dancer and unfortunately tore the meniscus in my knee at 16 and ended up having to have surgery and sort of talking to some mentors and sort of finding out that yes, I could continue down that avenue, but it was never going to be quite the same again. So I decided, all right, I'm going to have to switch up what I want to do. And at the time, being a dancer and nutrition being a huge thing for me, I decided, okay, I'll help other young dancers and I'll go off and study nutrition at university. So I went off and studied nutrition and food science and came out of that course. And this was in the early 2000s. And it was really hard to get a full time position back then. I'd had a couple of days a week at a community centre. I was volunteering at Nutrition Australia, but getting a full time job was difficult. So my girlfriend, who was also teaching dance part time with me, said, go off and do the Pilates course. You know, I've just done it. There's so much work in that area. You've done Pilates before, you've taught dance, you've got that teacher's aspect. You'll be great. And I thought, okay, sure, I'll look into it. I got a full-time job as a nutritionist as it just happened and enrolled in the course, which was after work hours and on weekends, and started balancing the two together. And when I finished the course, I'd rehabbed my own injuries. I'd had, ankle ligament pain. I'd torn my hamstrings previously. I had SIJ pain, all of these sort of dancer exercise injuries. And from figuring out and then rehabbing my own, I thought there's really something in this. And so I started teaching Pilates on the weekend while I was working full time, and then ended up transitioning across to the Pilates field more, quit my full time nutrition position, and then worked at different studios and eventually opened up my own Pilates and wellness studio where I kind of incorporated both Pilates and nutrition into the same sort of area. And, that was about 16 years ago. So that's where I am today, 2 kids later, and still loving the sort of Pilates and nutrition field.
Amazing. I love that, your own journey basically created this for you and now you get to teach other people. Although horribly sad to think of you as a teenager having to go through that.
Yeah, but it's just one of those things that, you may face something that you don't think is going to happen at the time, and it's like, well, what can I do with this, and where can it take me? So I think it's looking at things with a glass half full rather than glass half empty sometimes as well.
Yeah, that's so key, so important. So, what does movement health? Because I think you've used movement health in some of your work, right? So, what does movement health mean to you, and how does it tie into the way that you coach women today?
Well, when I opened the studio, and if you've done Pilates before, there's a really strong mind body connection. It's not just about, if you go to the gym, people put the TV on, they get on the treadmill and they just
Yeah.
watch the TV and they kind of zone out. When you're doing Pilates, you have to connect to your breath. So, a big thing, breath work has become a big thing nowadays. So, it really drops you back into that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest
Mm.
and digest. So, by connecting with your breath, you have to be present in the moment. You're thinking about your alignment, you're thinking about your movement. So, it's getting that mind movement aspect together. And then because of my qualifications in nutrition and then outside of Pilates, I've done a lot through, there's another form of method called gyrotonic. I've got my dance background and I wanted it to be more than just movement. It's
Mm.
the mind, the body, and health in general. So when I'm working with women, it's really funny. Even yesterday in the Pilates class I was teaching, a client's talking to me about having cramps and, should she go on magnesium and things like that.
Mm.
And because I've got that nutrition background as well, I'm like, well, yes, you can get magnesium from these foods and then you can look at supplementation. And if you're looking at supplementation, this is the, supplement you should be looking for and so on. So, when we start working on our body, we start thinking about other areas of our health. So it's kind of that all encompassing wellness aspect rather than looking at our health as just movement or just nutrition. It really does come together.
Yes, it is like the whole thing has to come together because everything is connected. So I love that Pilates really focuses on bringing you into that parasympathetic nervous system state because so many of us are not there. We're in fight or flight most of the time. We're stressed, we've got a lot on our plates, we're juggling a lot of things. And so I would love to know because of that, then what are like the biggest mistakes you see women make when they're trying to improve their health and their fitness?
I think the main thing is thinking that as we get older and we hit, our sort of mid to late 30s and early 40s and we start hitting perimenopause, we kind of still think that those same things that we did in our 20s are going to
Yeah.
work in our 40s. That's probably the biggest thing. Women will come in and they'll say, I'm still doing, I'm still running. I haven't changed anything, but now I've got this weight that around my belly that I just can't get rid of, even though I've changed nothing. And
Mhm.
my sleep's not great. And, our bodies do change and we have to adapt and change with it. That means that our nutrition needs to change, our movement generally needs to change, our sleep, our stress levels. So I think it's just, transitioning through that, learning about perimenopause, as I know you speak a lot about,
Yes.
and trying to embrace that sort of area as much as we can and make adjustments. And we don't have to look at it as a negative thing. We have to look at it as we're changing, we're growing as a person, and so
Mm.
we just need to accommodate our body whilst we make this transition.
I love that. I love that you're saying that we don't need to look at it as a negative thing. And I hear it all the time. I hear women being angry that they are in perimenopause or this change of their life and really like hating the world and hating their body and hating this time of their life. And it's sad.
Yeah, I think if you can look at it like I know, early on in my 20s, I knew nothing about my cycle. I didn't pay attention. I
Yeah.
just thought it was annoying. Every month this is going to be a pain in the butt. But then, as I aged and my cycle started to change, even having kids, your cycle
Mhm.
changes. And I hit my 30s and I started learning more about my cycle, then I started utilizing it more. You can schedule in your harder workouts depending on where you are in your cycle. And then as you start to hit perimenopause and summer, maybe you stop sleeping as well, or maybe you feel like stress is affecting you more, you've got that knowledge to be able to change
Mhm.
things. So I think if we can learn and sort of embrace that, then it can make a huge difference to some of the symptoms that we see come through when we do hit perimenopause.
Yeah, yeah, that's key. And so another thing that I'm seeing a lot is people feeling really overwhelmed. The women that I'm talking to are feeling really overwhelmed with all the things that they need to do, all the nutrition aspects, the movement, and then then throw in like stress stuff and working on their sleep and just all the things. And how do you see that as connecting with the burnout that we can sometimes see or even stalled progress when we kind of pile on all the things that we are supposed to be doing?
Yeah, that's a really big one. And I think as women, we put even more sort of pressure on ourselves because we do think that we have to be juggling everything. And we're usually, a lot of the time, trying to either look after kids or family or even
Yeah.
older parents too.
Yeah.
So when you layer all that on, it does add in a lot more stress. And I often say to my clients, sometimes we've just got to strip it back and go back to to basics. So don't think about, all the things that you're being told to do and all the things that seem popular right now that are, popping up everywhere. I said, just lean into the basics. Go back to eating basic whole foods. Dinner doesn't have to be fancy. You can cook up some protein, some salmon or some chicken, chuck in some veg, keep it simple. And when it comes to your movement, one, pick something you enjoy, because if you are doing, going to the gym, but you really hate going to the gym, one, it's not going to be good for your mindset. Two, your motivation levels are going to drop and you're going to drop out very quickly. And three, you're going to probably have higher stress levels and cortisol levels, which aren't going to help anyway. So finding a movement modality that you enjoy and then leaning into that and making sure that you don't put that pressure on yourself to do certain length workouts. I know a lot of women sort of
Mm.
think, to be an hour. I have to do this. I have to. No have tos. Get rid of the have tos and the shoulds, and just go. Okay, what time have I got today? I've got 15 minutes. Can I roll out my mat? Can I do, 15 minutes of Pilates or yoga or just a body strength workout and just fit it in around what I'm doing? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a class. It doesn't have to be a certain length. And it's finding those pockets of time and even carving out those pockets of time and putting yourself first, because that's another area where women tend to put everybody else before them. And I say to my clients, in your diary, get your diary out and put in when you're going to move your body and put it in
Mm.
like an appointment. You wouldn't not turn up to the doctor. So why do you think it's okay not to turn up for
Mm.
yourself when it's moving your body? So I think some of those things and just having that mindset that not every day is going to be perfect. It's not going to go perfectly. And so embrace that and then move on to the next day and start afresh again.
Yes, I love that. Keeping it simple. I think that is like such an important thing that we have to remember. And I totally notice how even myself, I've done it before where I feel like, oh, I need to do a 30-minute workout or I need to do a 60-minute workout. And we get stuck in our heads and we think, well, I don't have 30 minutes or 60 minutes, and therefore I'm going to skip. It's just not going to happen today. And shifting that into, well, all right, what can you do in even 5 or 10 minutes if you really don't even have a lot of time? And sometimes when you just break it down into those little tiny bites, then it's something that's doable and then it can actually happen. So I love that. Do you have any tips for the women listening on how to make it more enjoyable? Because this is a sore spot for me. I definitely have to kind of force myself to do my workouts. Maybe there's some tips that we could be utilizing that help to make it a little more enjoyable.
Yeah, this is a difficult one because sometimes people just don't like movement in general, which I totally get. But a few little tips. One, if you can do it with a friend. So if you're not a mover, but you can meet up with a friend once a week and do a walk instead of sitting in a cafe and having a coffee. I
Mm,
do that with one of my girlfriends quite regularly. And it's you kind of look at if you've got like a tracker watch, you kind of go, oh my goodness, I've done 10,000 steps in, 45, 50 minutes. And it's gone like that because you've been talking the whole time and catching up. So I think if
yeah.
you can meet up with a friend, that's always really great. Another one is, what sport did you play when you were a kid? So this is one most people give up what they did when they were a kid, but it's usually the sports that give you joy. So for me, it was dance, and I've just gone back to dance in the last couple of years. After having kids and transitioning and finally getting a little bit more time back, and the joy is still there. So think about what hobbies you did when you were younger, incorporate them in if you can. And then I like to add in music. So if you have a favorite song or a favorite sort of, list of songs that you've put together, put that on. And even if you rolled out your mat and you're like, oh, I just don't feel like doing that workout. If you put your favorite song on, you probably just end up dancing around the room anyway and getting, some motivation and endorphins
Right.
going and feeling better. So I think music can be a really big driver because most people have got some favorite songs that they really like. So they're kind of my top three sort of tips that if you're not really into movement. And then the fourth one would be just keeping it a little bit shorter. Sort of
Hmm.
go, okay, I'm going to do 5 minutes. I'm going to lie down on my mat and see how I feel. Maybe I'll do a few stretches. Once you start moving and those endorphins start flowing, you usually then feel, more inclined to do more. So just start. That's probably the final tip is even if you feel resistant, just give it a go and it usually pans out in the end.
Yes, I love all those. So doing it with a friend, and I've even joined classes where I know that the ladies are kind of it like builds that accountability because I know they're going to be wondering where I am if I don't show up. So I've done that before, and that has really helped. And yeah, making it more fun with friends is definitely helpful. And then yeah, doing the movement that you loved as a younger person, whether it's childhood or young adult or something like dance or a sport like that. Love that. And the music one, I definitely encourage that with my clients as well, is just put the music on, whether it's 80s or classic rock or whatever it is for you, pop, whatever, rap, hip hop. It definitely changes the whole thing. It puts you in a whole different mood. So I love it. And of course, keeping it short so that it's easy to actually do. Love all those tips. So I hope people really pay attention to those, write them down, figure it out for yourself what is going to help you the most. Now, I would love to transition to muscle building and bone health, especially as we age 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. How is that important to us at this age? And any tips that you can share of how you can make it even better, how you can really optimize bone health and our muscles.
Yes, well, I think this is a really important topic. It's actually coming into sort of the media a little bit more now, in different circles, but I've been talking about it quite a bit with my clients and sort of population recently because a few of my clients are starting to get a bit older and a few of my clients have fallen and had fractures. And we often think that this is only going to happen when we're in our 70s or 80s. But it's happening to women now in their 40s and their 50s, and they're really surprised when it happens. So, as women, we lay the majority of our bone mass down before the age of 30. So, after the age of 30, we tend to start to lose bone mass. We're not actually laying it down anymore at those foundations. We can maintain it and we can definitely build on it after the age of 30, but it's much harder. So, really, if you have daughters, nieces, and they're in their sort of teenage years and or in 20s, encourage them to really be playing sport, loading their bones, whether or not that's, lifting weights and getting that resistance work or adding in things like running and jumping. So we're getting that impact because that impact makes a big difference. So as we start to age, if we're not actively doing these types of activities, we will lose bone mass. And as I said, most people think about it too late. So if you're in your sort of 40s and you're in that perimenopause stage, this is the time to start thinking about it because once we hit menopause around the age of 50, 51 is the average age, we tend to lose about 3 to 5% of our bone mass per year for those first 5 years of menopause. So we can lose up to around 20% of our bone mass in those first 5 years of menopause, which if your bone mass is already a little bit low, that will push you into the osteopenia or the
Mm.
osteoporosis range straight away. And then that's when we trip, go down, put our wrist down, and we break our wrist. So, really thinking about that bone mass and muscle mass goes hand in hand. If you're lifting weights, adding in resistance work, doing that body work training, you're going to be building bone mass and you're going to be building that muscle mass too. So, again, after the age of about 30, we start to lose muscle if we're not actively building it. And it's a slower decline. It's usually by the age of 60. Once we hit 60, we lose about 1% of our muscle mass per year, again, if we're not actively building it. So that's why there's such a steep increase from 60 plus for falls and fractures because of that link between muscle and bone. So when it comes to your training, we need to be adding in load. So that means weights, resistance bands, you can, if you're a gym goer, you can add in the weight machines. If you're not a gym goer, get those hand weights at home or your kettlebells and start adding them into your workouts. Even in the Pilates studio, people will come in who have done Pilates elsewhere and they're like, oh, you've got a set of kettlebells. And I'm like, yep, because we add them in to the exercises. Because I know for a lot of my clients that are time poor, this may be the one session they're doing a week. So I'm going to make sure that they're building muscle and they're building bone by adding in that load. So another common question that comes through is how often do I need to be doing weighted workouts to make a difference? Minimum twice a week, ideally 3 times a week, we want to be adding in either resistance or load. So that may look like you go to your weekly Pilates class and you got hand weights in. It might mean doing, a 20-minute workout at home. And then the third one, rebounders or the little trampolines have become really popular. You might be jumping on there or getting a skipping rope and adding and skipping, doing some type of work that's adding that impact to that bone. And a lot of women get scared about jogging, running, skipping, especially as they start to age. Pelvic floor issues, totally understand that. But when it comes to loading bone, we actually only need to do 1 to 2 minutes 3 times a week to start to load bone. So if you can do 2 minutes of skipping 3 times a week, you're already going to start to load that bone. So it doesn't, again, need to be 10, 20 an hour. It's just a couple of minutes a few times a week. So I think if you know that, it seems a little bit less daunting. And even if you're like, I definitely can't run, you can just do little hops on the spot, hold on to your bench and start just adding the load in that way. And then as you become stronger and you build up that strength, take the hands off, or grab a skipping rope and start adding in some skipping. So, and then, the flip side of that is if you do have pelvic floor issues, make sure you see a pelvic floor physio and get that checked out because again, we may have, pelvic floor issues from childbirth, but as we hit perimenopause and the menopause and estrogen levels are dropping, that's the next time that women often see the pelvic floor issues start to come through. So it's something that, you can get addressed and you can see someone. It doesn't need to be that we end up having to use, liners all the time. We can definitely work on our pelvic floors.
Okay, I think that that is so important because I think there's a lot of women that are dealing with the pelvic floor issues, me included. So, I mean, it is common. I don't think we even talk about it enough. And finding help for it feels sometimes a little overwhelming too. Like, where do we go? Who do we talk to? But I know that I've seen a lot of different exercises online. Now, this just popped into my head. Can Pilates help with pelvic floor issues?
Yes, it's one of the big things that women will often come in, and I always speak to women about their pelvic floor, especially if they're having issues with their pelvic floor. So, as part of our core, our pelvic floor is the floor of our core. So, when we're engaging our core, there needs to be some pelvic floor activation happening there. So we do talk about that in Pilates and we talk about correct activation of pelvic floor, but also relaxing the pelvic floor. So most people think that their pelvic floor, if they're having issues, it's because it's weak. It's not always weak. Sometimes it's too strong. So if we're having issues where we have frequency for the bathroom, like we go, but we don't quite go all the way. And then a couple of minutes later, we've got to go again, or having any type of pain, it may be during intercourse or just pain in general, then often our pelvic floor is actually too tight. And so then we've got to work on
Mm.
exercises and that release the pelvic floor. So I always say to my clients that if they're having any type of pelvic floor issues that range from pain to leakage to not being able to empty the bladder fully, definitely go see your doctor. Or if you are coming to a Pilates class like me, I have pelvic floor physios that I will refer to. So either speak to your Pilates instructor if that's part of your Pilates, because it does differ, what type of Pilates you're doing and where you're going and the type of relationship you have with your instructor.
Mhm.
Otherwise, definitely, head off to your GP and they'll be able to send you in the right direction because pelvic floor influences our everyday life all the time. So it's definitely something that Pilates can help, but your instructor generally needs to know whether or not you've got a weaker or a stronger pelvic floor and speak to that pelvic floor physio so they know that you're working on, and then we can do corresponding exercises to really support that too.
Okay, awesome. And I love that you did let us know that it's 1 to 2 minutes 3 times a week. So I know that one of my workouts that I do very regularly is a minute. It starts with a minute of jumping jacks and ends with a minute of jumping jacks. So I'm thinking in my head, all right, I think I've got that covered. So
That's it. You're loading bone
yes,
by doing that.
yes, I love it. Okay. And that does make it less daunting for sure. Okay. So now, what I wanted to ask you, the last kind of big topic that I didn't want to miss. I know that you talk about gut health. And so I wanted to know what your approach to gut health is in a way that's manageable for busy women.
Mm. This is a really tough one because people think when it comes to gut health, they need to do a big overhaul of their diet and they need to cut out gluten and dairy and,
Right.
maybe change and go to vegetarian or vegan and that. Our guts are really different from person to person. So they have, influence from our genetics to our environment to the food we eat to how we were brought up. So many different factors. So the diet that I eat can be totally different to the diet that will suit your body, Lucy, because of all of these factors together. So, one, I really love to encourage people just to go back to whole foods. So, if you can eliminate processed foods or as many processed foods from your diet as you can, then your gut health is already going to improve. So, hugely, just going back to if you're thinking about breakfast, can you scramble some eggs, have some avocado and tomatoes rather than reaching for like, a breakfast cereal or Pop Tarts or something like that from the cupboard. So, again, keep it simple, go back to whole foods. Two, I love to get my clients to focus on fiber. So, fiber isn't sexy, but we really need it. So, as women, we need 25 to 30 grams of fiber daily. So, that is going to look like, our whole grains, our fruits and veggies, nuts and seeds. Really, just as we said, if you're going back to that whole food diet, your afternoon snack could be some almonds or some walnuts, some Greek yogurt, and an apple. All right. We're going to get some great fiber from that. So, stick to those basics, focus on fiber. Then next, think about your hydration. So, are you drinking enough water? This is probably the other one that I see through women. They don't drink
Yes.
enough water generally. They'll be like, oh, I have, a coffee in the morning and then I don't really drink much to anything in the afternoon. And then I feel really low on energy. So I have a Diet Coke because I know that's better for me than having the full sugar Coke. So again, it's nothing wrong with coffee and tea, but really get that hydration, get that water in as much as you can. And then finally, if you're dialing those three things in just to start with, again, keeping it simple, and you're like, yep, I'm ready for one more, look at adding in some fermented foods. So, sauerkraut, kimchi, pickled vegetables, look at adding in 1 to 2 servings a day. So that may be, adding in some pickled vegetables to your salad or some kimchi on the side at dinner. So just looking at those fermented foods because they're really great for, boosting up those probiotics in our, gut health.
Mm.
But on the flip side, if that all feels too hard, just focus on the first three. So again, a bit like the approach to movement, just really keep it simple. Go back to that whole food diet and you'll usually have it covered. If you are getting some symptoms, like maybe, you have toast for breakfast and you know that you're not feeling well afterwards, maybe you're getting symptoms like brain fog or you're heading off to the toilet, or your concentration just isn't there, then go to your doctor. You can get tests done to find out and you can just cut back. Sometimes people have sensitivities, but they're not fully, allergic to things. And again, as we were talking about before with perimenopause, as our sort of movement and that may need to change, our gut may change too. So that's where our nutrition may need to change. And we may have tolerated, gluten really well in our 20s and 30s, but we've hit 40 now and it's not quite there. So it's just making those smaller adjustments to your diet as you need to. It might not mean cutting it out, gluten out completely, but it may mean that you can only have one piece of sourdough, a really good quality sourdough, once or twice a week rather than having just normal supermarket bread every day.
Yeah, yeah. So it might look like changing some of our habits where maybe we go out for pizza and subs and takeout on a regular basis and might have to be cutting back on that. So, but I love that you're making it simple. It doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be this whole big thing. It can be just simply focus on eating more of the whole foods and less of the processed. I like that.
Yeah. And I think that makes it a bit more doable majority of
Yes.
the time. If you look at the 80-20 rule and you go,
Yeah.
okay, 80% of the time I'm going to eat whole foods, 20% I'm going to indulge, I'm going to have what I enjoy, then overall you're going to be pretty good. Unless, as we sort of said, you've got an allergy or whatever, and then you need further exploration just to see what's really going on.
Yes. Yes. That sounds great. Okay. So I would love to hear your advice for if somebody says to you, I want to feel stronger, I want to feel healthier, but I just don't know where to start. What would you say to them?
So I'd say start slowly and just pick one thing to focus on first. So what's the least sort of layer of resistance? Is it going to be easy for you to, swap just to eating whole foods? Let's focus on that first. Movement wise, usually when people, make it to me in the studio, we do like a full health history. We check everything out. Maybe they've got injuries. So again, we'll just start really gently with some basic exercises, and then I'll give them just one exercise to practice for homework. And sometimes it even isn't even an exercise. It may just be an awareness. So if they've got an issue with balance, I'll be like, okay, what I want you to do is make sure every time you're standing, you're thinking about the 3 points in your feet, your big toe, your little toe in the center of your
Mm.
heel, and you're going to share your weight between those 3 points every time you stand. So I think if you're starting a new fitness routine or you want to change the way you're eating, just pick one thing to focus on first. Dial that in for a week or two. Once that becomes a habit or it seems really easy, then layer in the next step. I do think if you're returning to movement or you're wanting to start, like Pilates, something new that you haven't tried before, joining a class, having an instructor to guide you is a really great idea. So, really working with someone that knows their stuff that can support you because sometimes it's a bit scary. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
this is like out of my depth. And I know I've had clients come to the studio and they're like, I'm not sure how I'm going to go. I'm carrying a bit of extra weight. I'm feeling a bit self-conscious. And I'm like, don't worry about, any of that. You've made it here, already you should be giving yourself a pat on the back. And we're just going to start nice and slowly. So start slow, start with one thing at a time. And if you're returning to movement, see if you can find someone that you can work with. And even if, money can be an issue, maybe you just do, 5 to 10 sessions with an instructor. And then once you've got, the idea of it and the basics
Mm.
down, and then you just want to start doing it at home or do your own thing at the gym, then at least you've got that idea of technique and that behind you. So you're going to protect yourself from injury.
Mm. Love that. I love that. And I think that's a perfect segue to learn a little bit more about your online platform and how you're helping women stay consistent and reach their goals.
Yeah, so my online platform is called My Movement Health, and that was kind of born out of people coming to the studio once a week and going, what can I do in between? Like, how do I keep this going? So My Movement Health is a women's wellness hub. We have Pilates workouts, strength workouts. As we've talked today, there's workouts for osteoporosis and
Mm.
osteopenia. So there's specific rehab workouts in there too. And then on top of that, with being a nutritionist, I've put in recipes. We've got women's health masterclasses. As we touched on pelvic floor before, we've got a few masterclasses in there with pelvic floor physios, all things from, meditation to gut
Mm.
health to brain health. So really trying to encompass a wellness hub for women because as we were saying before, movement is great, but once you sort of start that, you want to start to dial other things in. And overall, when we're looking at longevity, we need brain health, we need body health. We just really need, mind, body, spirit connected and working really well together. So that's how that came about. And because I love supporting women and women's health, it's just transitioned into really supporting women through, especially through that sort of perimenopause and then menopause stage as their bodies and minds are changing.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. I love that it incorporates so many different things. And because right? It's all connected. We need to support not just the movement or not just the food, but also, the emotional and mental aspect too, in order to, fully reach our goals. Okay, so I would love to hear where the listeners can learn more about you and connect with you, and also any last words that you have for our listeners to walk away with today.
Sure. So listeners can reach out. I'm on Facebook and Instagram at My Movement Health. And they can definitely head across to the website, which is mymovementhealth.com.au because I'm in Australia. There's free recipes on the website. I'm a podcast host as well, so people can check out the My Movement Health podcast too while they're there. But one piece of health advice, I think it's just making sure that women know not to be too hard on themselves and just take everything one step at a time. So if something seems really overwhelming, break it down. Okay. Just take that first step. If you want to return to exercise, ask your friend, where are they? And you're interested in, say, Pilates, ask your friend where they're going. Get some, jump online, have a look at some reviews. Just take it one step at a time as you go along and give yourself some grace because, if you're like every woman right now, you're probably juggling a lot in your life. And we put a lot of, pressure on ourselves to be a certain way, look a certain way, do certain things. And really, at the end of the day, we just need to take that pressure off and just take that first step, and we'll always feel happier for it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. All the links are going to be in the show notes so that people can easily find you and learn more about you and the online platform. And I think that this all makes sense. It so aligns with everything that I'm also promoting and talking about on my podcast. And I am very excited for our listeners to hear this conversation today. So thank you so much for being here, Kate.
Thank you for having me on, Lucy. It's been great.